Well, let's get started if it's all right. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you being here. We have just like a couple of Wednesdays here in between Holy Week and my vacation week. So I thought, what's something we could do in just a couple of weeks that would be a lot of fun? And so I thought, let's just do like a travelogue with some, just going around to different places in Bible lands and just looking at the sites. And this is, I think, a lot of fun. And if you ever get a chance to go to Israel, you should go. It just makes the Bible come alive. And there's so much in the Bible that is dependent upon the geography to get the meaning. It really makes a big difference. So I hope you'll go. So my scheme of maneuver here is to just kind of trace Bible history in writ large, and then look at some pictures of and maps of various places as we go through. And we'll see how far we get. So if we wanted to start way at the very beginning of civilization, you start with what's called the Fertile Crescent. Now you've heard that before, right? Because even they teach this in the secular school, geography and stuff like that. The Fertile Crescent is the areas where it was believed that civilization first arose. So if you look at it, it's called a crescent because it's kind of crescent shaped. Really, it should go down here into Egypt. So it should kind of be like this whole thing should be green. And why is it that area? Well, because that's where these rivers are. See the Euphrates and the Tigris, and down here the Nile. And that's where civilization started, where people started living together in villages and then towns, and then cultivating language and arts and architecture and all kinds of things. And it all begins there. So what's right in the middle of the Fertile Crescent? Israel, right. It's right in the middle. So all the things that are going to happen between the major powers for the next thousands of years, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Lydia, Phrygia, it's all happening around Israel. And also all the trade routes and things are happening right in there. So there were two major roadways. One is the way by the sea, which was a road that kind of went along the Mediterranean coastline. And then another one that came around the outside of the Dead Sea and came up toward Damascus. That was called the King's Highway. And so those were the major trade routes. So Israel's right in the middle, where everything is going back and forth all the time. Militarily, economically, it's right in the center of everything. Also, it's worthwhile just noting, this map is a better one to show it. They don't have a map legend that tells us what these mean, but you can almost guess. When you see green, what does that mean? Probably more fertile. Yeah, more rainfall, more vegetation. And then when you get to brown, it's going to be more desert. Dark brown is going to be even more desert. This grayish is going to be mountains, right? So if you look at it, what do you notice right away? Israel is right between the Mediterranean Sea on the west and a huge, huge desert, the Arabian Desert, on the east. And so when the winds were coming from the west, what would happen? It would blow in rainfall. When the winds were coming from the east, what would happen? It would be hot, dry, and scorching and dusty. And so the winds prevailed at different times of the years, and that would affect the weather. And you can almost kind of cut Israel right in half with a knife this way, because to the left side, on the side by the Mediterranean Sea, you see where it's more green? They get more rain along the coastline. On the east side, see it's brown, it's very hot and dry. on that side. You can also cut it north and south, because further north they're getting more rain, and the further south you go, you start getting into this area. Who knows what this is? The Sinai, right. And what is that? That's a desert too. So the further south you go, the more you're getting into desert areas. And so it's just an interesting thing the way it works. 75% of the rain in Israel is in the north. 75% of the good farmland is in the south. The better quality land is actually, there's better quality soil actually in the, so, and then of course, you know, you get where it meets and in between. And I remember my mom telling me this. We'll look at some pictures of the Jezreel Valley, and I think that's where she described it. I might be wrong, but it wouldn't be far from there probably. Where here, do you have farmers that grow alfalfa for their feed? How many crops of alfalfa in Wisconsin will you get in a year? How many times can you cut it? 3 or 4. 3 or 4? In Israel, 15 to 18 cuttings a year in certain places. Where the soil is so rich and they get plenty of rainfall. That's how wealthy it is in certain spots. But you only have to go 35 or 40 miles from there, and you're in places where you're scraping out a living in rocks, just hoping to survive. So it's an area of huge contrasts, and it's very exciting. And all of those factors play into the Bible. So let's scroll through some of these and just have fun with them. All right, so the Genesis 12, kind of the storyline of the Bible, starts with Abraham. Who remembers where Abraham was from? Ur of the Chaldees. Look where Ur is. Ur is here in Sumer, Chaldea, Babylon, what would become Babylon. That's where he lived. And so the Lord told him to go to the land that he would show him, which would be the promised land. So Abraham went from Ur to Israel. How did he get there? Not like this. Why not? Have to cross the desert. He comes up this way. Padan Aram, Haran, those are all biblical places, and then comes down. See how he follows the green, follows the rivers, follows the wet areas, and comes in there. And then Abraham's son was?
Isaac.
Isaac's sons were?
Jacob.
And
Esau.
And Jacob had how many sons?
12.
12 sons, right? And the 12 sons ended up going, because of their brother Joseph, into? Egypt, right. So let's pick up there with our story. So where did they live in Egypt? They lived in, this is a good map. So this is a close-up now of Sinai. So they lived in Goshen. Where's Goshen? Well, here's the Nile River. And you see what the Nile River does? As it starts getting closer to the Mediterranean Sea?
It splits.
Yeah. So this is a land that has plenty of water and is very, very fertile. So there's a photo of the Nile Delta. Excuse the high power lines in the back. Those weren't there when Abraham was there. But what do you notice about it right away?
Green.
Water, trees, crops, greenery. It's beautiful. Okay, where did they go then when the Lord led them out of Egypt? So they crossed the Red Sea somewhere, we don't know exactly where, but somewhere in here. And they went into the Sinai, and in the Sinai they ended up coming down to the place where the Lord gave the 10 Commandments. The name of that place is?
Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai, yeah. Let's take a look at that. There's Mount Sinai. Isn't that something? I mean, it's not like Mount Everest, but if someone told you go to the top, we'll meet you for lunch. That wouldn't be easy, would it? That's a big mountain. This is from Mount Sinai looking down. So if you were part of one of the Israelites camping at the foot of Mount Sinai, that may very well have been the place where you were, right down in that little section down there. This is a little monastery that was built, of course, many, many, many years later at the foot of Mount Sinai. It's called St. Catherine's. It's still there today. Very famous place. I think it was in the 1800s. I might not have my dates correct. But there was a German archaeologist working, he was employed by the Tsar of Russia, sent down here to find artifacts, and he went to St. Catherine's, and they put him up for the night. And while he was there, he saw a monk trying to get the fire started by taking a knife with some old pieces of paper and cutting the paper in thin slices and throwing them in to kind of help get the fire going. And this fellow von Tischendorf gets a look at this old paper, and it's really, really old. He says, mind if I look at that? So he takes it in his room that night, and he's pouring over. It's a biblical text. Really, really old. And once he kind of showed interest in it, the monks knew all of a sudden it was valuable. Now they didn't want to part with it. I don't remember exactly the story how he got it, but somehow he acquired it, and it got taken up to Europe, and I can't remember where it is now today. It's in a famous museum somewhere, but it's one of the most famous ancient texts of the Bible that we have, with that really valuable. Okay, so they went from Mount Sinai then, and you see the dotted line, how they traveled north, and they came to a place up here called the wilderness of Paran. Like there's Kadesh Barnea. So you see where they're kind of south of Israel. Here's the Dead Sea. They're kind of on the edge of the Sinai Peninsula and south of Israel. And that's where they were wandering for 40 years. What was it like there? 40 years they lived there.
Ooh.
Not very hospitable, right? It doesn't look like a lot of fun. It wasn't a really great place. All right, then they came up around from the wilderness of Paran. They eventually came around the east side of the Dead Sea up north, and they defeated Og and Sihon on the two kings on the east side of the Jordan River, and they came to a roadblock. The roadblock was Jericho, because Jericho was this huge fortress, and it was built by an oasis that had natural water, so they had good land, lots of food, lots of water, and they were in a place where they could be very well protected. So it was a big city and a strong city, and you can't just let your people go wandering around there, because the troops can come out of the city and kill them. You got to stop the city somehow. So you remember what they did at Jericho? What happened? How the Lord had them march around every day, and then the seventh day they went around 7 times, and then they blew the trumpets. The trumpets were ram's horns. And what happened to Jericho?
Walls came tumbling.
The walls came tumbling down. So now Jericho has been dug up on the archaeology of it. This would be from kind of a westward looking view. And what do you see down at the bottom? Plenty of greenery, because they have water supplies there. But as you get behind it, there's these big rocks. Now Jericho wasn't up here. I mean, how would you get up and down? But I think, if I'm not mistaken, Jericho's somewhere in here. It's kind of built up high, so it's higher than the elevation of the oasis. And you can't attack it from the backside, with the rocks up there. So you're in a really good defensible position. And they built it out of mud bricks. So you make these giant bricks out of mud and lay them together. But these mud bricks in places were like 20 feet thick. So you think, oh, mud brick, just get like a sledgehammer and knock through it. Well, they're not 20 feet thick through it. So it's pretty heavy duty stuff. This would be a picture from the dig of where Jericho, the old city was, looking down at the oasis today. So now we're looking eastward. And you can see how nice a place it was. Jericho's a very, very beautiful place. This is someone's reconstruction based on archaeological information of what they think the old city would have been like. So what do you notice right away? There's 2 rings of walls. So there's an outer wall, and then you can't tell from the 2-dimensional picture, but it's actually pretty steep in between, leading up to an inner wall. And then there's these, what do you call those, ramparts or battlements all around. So this place would be really hard to destroy, except if you've got the Lord on your side. That makes a big difference, doesn't it? There's a picture of some of the old bricks. You see the bricks down there where they've dug out? You can see kind of what it would have looked like. And there's a picture of a place in the wall. So you can see the bricks on the right side that still exist. The one on the left is stone. So I don't know if that was part of the inner wall or if that was built later. The city was destroyed many times and then rebuilt again and again. Jericho may be the oldest city in the world. A lot of people think that that's where civilization has existed the longest of any place in the world. All right, so once they got through, this slide is in the wrong place. Don't worry about that. They're coming from the east. They cross the Jordan River, and here's Jericho. And you can tell by the map, you see how all the little bumps there, the relief of the map, that letting you know that these are hills and mountains behind it. Here in the Jordan Valley, it's more flat, so they're able to cross where it's flat, and then they're looking westward, like in the picture that I showed you, where you see the mountains behind the oasis city, and they're camped there at Gilgal. And then they destroy Jericho, and now it's time for them to go in and take the promised land. So who remembers the next city that they try to take? The city of Ai. So they march over here, and Jericho was a big, huge, impregnable city. Ai was this little tiny city. So Joshua says, we won't need many guys for this. So he only dispatches 3,000 guys. And what happened? Israel gets whooped. And does anyone remember why? God had told them to destroy everything in Jericho. And one of the men, Achan, found some silver buried underneath one of the houses. And so he kept it. And so God revealed that he had stolen that silver. And when they put him to death then, now they attacked Ai again. And the second time God gave them a victory and they destroyed Ai. But it says that when they attacked Ai, the men from Ai came out and chased them back through the rocks all the way to like a rock quarry. So here's a sample of like a stone ravine outside of Ai. So you can see how this would happen, right? Can you see it from where you're sitting? So you're marching up this way. You can't really see the city, right? You're going up. And then you get attacked. You can't go to the left, you can't go to the right, so you're running backwards, and you're running downhill, and they're chasing you, and that's how the attack happened. And then when they attacked Ai the second time, the plan that God told them to use is they attacked this way, and then they pretended to retreat. And when the men of Ai attacked them down the ravine again, then they got ambushed from the side. Okay, after they attacked Ai, who remembers what happened next? Here's Ai up here. Some men came from Gibeon. And Gibeon was a city where they heard how God had helped them destroy Jericho and Ai. And the Gibeonites came and they wore these old clothes and they brought these really old, tired-looking donkeys, and they came and they said, we're just poor people from far, far away, and we've heard God is with you. Please make an agreement with us not to hurt us, and we'll serve you. And Israel said, okay, we won't destroy you. And then they found out Gibeon was right next to them. They were right there. They said, you lied to us. But they weren't gonna break the covenant. So they said, okay, you have to serve us. From now on, you have to cut wood. Now, what have you noticed in the pictures I've been showing you? There's not a lot of trees, except in the low, wet spots. But you know, back then, historically, there were lots of trees in Israel, all over the place. Trees grew like crazy. And what happened is they've been cut down through the centuries. And that's what's caused it to go back to the old desolate look that it has now. But back then, it was very well forested. So they made the Gibeonites serve them by being woodcutters. You're going to cut our wood for us. Well, now, a bunch of other kings, and in those days, to be a king, how much property did you have to be in charge of? Just like a big city. King was kind of like a mayor, right, in those days. Because you didn't have a huge kingdom. But the king of Hebron, and the king of Eglon, and the king of Lachish, and the king of Jarmuth, and there's one more I'm forgetting, and king of Jerusalem, Jebus, they formed a coalition. They said, hey, these Israelites are coming. They're going to wipe us out if we don't stop them. So they got all their armies together, and they formed one big army, and they marched on Gibeon, and Gibeon called the Israelites and said, we made a deal with you, and now they're about to attack us and destroy us. So the Israelites came out, and God gave them the victory, and they won. And then the Israelites marched down and conquered all those cities. So there's a picture of Gibeon today. What do you notice? You see how it kind of rises on a hill right in the center? That's where they would build cities. If you're up on a hill, it's harder for your enemies to get you. All right, now they conquered the south down here, and so they start moving to the north. And so now another king, the king of, look, it's spelled like Hazor, but I think that would be pronounced Hatzor. The king of Hatzor tells the other kings in northern Israel, the Israelites, these Hebrews are coming. If we don't band together and stop them, they're going to wipe us out like they wiped everybody else out. So they form a big coalition army. And they gather at this place called Merom. Now you see where that is? Here's the Sea of Galilee, so we're way up north now. And you see the rock, the mountainous areas in the map. So it's letting you know that you're up in mountainous areas here. As you get closer to Syria, you're in high areas. But Merom is kind of a flat area. I think I have a picture of that. Let's see. There, so you see that? How it's all low and flat in the foreground? And then there's kind of a low mountain range in the back. So Merom was a low flat area where this army could wait. Nobody can sneak in on them. Whichever way you come, you're gonna see them coming, and you have a lot of different ways that you can get out between the mountains. So that's a good staging place. But what happened to them? God gave them a victory again. Joshua and the army of Israel attacked right there and defeated the army of the northern coalition. All right, now I thought what would be fun to do is take a couple of examples out of the book of Judges then. So after Joshua, you remember that the land of Israel was apportioned between the tribes. I don't know if you can read it on this map, but it shows where the different areas are that God told them they could go. So down here is Simeon, here's Judah, here's the land for Dan, here's the land for Ephraim, a little bit for Benjamin, Reuben, Manasseh. All the 12 tribes were given a section. And if you've read the book of Judges, you've seen how they were supposed to take possession of the land. There were certain people that they were supposed to exterminate. the really, really bad Canaanites, the ones that burned their babies as sacrifices to gods, and did terrible things like that, God said exterminate them. This is their punishment, is that you're supposed to wipe them out. The other ones, if they lived within your area that was assigned to you, if they agreed not to fight you, they could work for you, like the Gibeonites who cut wood for them. What did the Israelites do? They failed to kill the people that they were supposed to kill. Spiritually, just think for a moment, what might that relate to spiritually in our own lives? You think of a spiritual relationship, that kind of a spiritual analogy maybe for that in our lives. What are you supposed to kill? Not Canaanites.
The old man, their sinful nature.
Yeah, put to death in you, Paul says in the epistles. And he lists a bunch of things that are according to the old nature. We're supposed to kill and put to death them. What if you don't put them to death? What if you compromise with them and say, all right, we're supposed to kill you, but let's just make a deal. You have your space and I'll have my space and we'll try to coexist and get along together. That's the way most of us are, right? We don't put those things to death. So we're trying to coexist in our lives with things that shouldn't be. And what did it do for the nation of Israel? It brought them ruin. So they went through this long period of the judges where God would raise up deliverers or judges who he would give them power, and they would destroy the Canaanites that were oppressing them. They would fall into sin, and they would start serving the gods of the people that they had left in place. And then because of their sin, God would allow another nation to come in, oppress them, and militarily conquer them. God would raise up another judge when they would cry out to him. And so you just see that cycle again and again. I thought it would be fun. We don't have time to go through all the judges, but I thought it'd be fun to just look at maybe a couple of the examples of them. So I thought first of Deborah. Now let's see if we have a better map here. Not for you. So take a look at this map up here. Can you see where you are? Mediterranean Sea. So here's the Sea of Galilee. So the Jordan River is going down here. The Dead Sea is going to be down here. So we're up in the northern part of Israel. And right through here is a big valley. There's a mountain range here. And in fact, you could see it up here, Mount Carmel. And that is the name of this entire mountain range, the Carmel mountain range. And then there's this big valley in between, the Jezreel Valley. And then there's a mountain over here that I'm going to show you in just a moment. But on the edge of this Carmel mountain range is a city called Megiddo. And so based on the city Megiddo, this Jezreel Valley eventually was given the name Armageddon. So that you've heard of before, right? So Armageddon is the apocalyptic description of the great battle that takes place in this huge valley. It was said that when Napoleon came through here many centuries later, he looked in the Jezreel Valley and he thought it was wonderful. He said, all the armies of the world could maneuver in here. Well, that's kind of exactly the point behind Armageddon, right? So you've got this big valley. Well, the Israelites had been conquered by the Canaanites, who had headquarters in Megiddo and this city Haroshet Hagoyim, which we aren't for sure exactly where that is, but we know where Megiddo was. And by this time, something had happened. So everything I've been describing up until now was taking place during the Bronze Age. But by this time now, they've entered the early Iron Age. And so the Canaanites had the use of iron. Presumably they borrowed the technology from either the Egyptians or somebody else. And so they had chariots. So chariots for them would be like tanks are for us. So you could imagine if a country invades us and they have tanks and we go out there with our shotguns, we're not going to do very much, right? The chariots, not only does it give you a tactical advantage, if you're on the chariot and you're coming up on a foot soldier, he's trying to stab up, you're stabbing down. Who's got the advantage? Plus, you're riding in on him fast, right? You know, he's got to make sure your horses don't run him over, so he's got to dodge this way. You can steer whichever way you plan and get at him, right? But also, it's a quick reaction force. So if you've got, let's say you're in the middle of a huge battle, and he starts trying to flank you, and he sends 1,000 men over to one side or the other, why, you just send 150 chariots over there and cut them off. They're going to get there way before the guys on foot are. So you're always, wherever he's going, you're there first. And you always have the advantage. You can't fight an army with chariots. And the Canaanites had chariots, and the Israelites didn't. But God raised up this judge, Deborah, a woman judge, by the way. Amazing thing. And he's going to, through her, bring glory to Israel. And he tells her they're going to defeat the Canaanites. How did they do that? How did they do it? Well, they started up here on this mountain. There's a little mountain there. I don't want to leave the map. I'm going to show you the mountain in just a moment. So Israel's troops all went up on the mountain. Now the chariot advantage is gone, right? Because you can't ride the chariot up the mountain. So you can surround the mountain, you can cut off all their food and cut off their way of escape. They can't win, they can't beat you, but you can't beat them while you're up on the mountain. But what happens is when God tells them to come down the mountain and they come down, God sends a huge, huge rainstorm all at once. And all of a sudden, this whole valley that is super fertile, you'll see the pictures of it, it all becomes a big pool of mud. And now what happens to your chariots?
Can't go.
Keep going. And the Israelites win the battle. And the Israelites chase them all the way down to Megiddo and defeat their army there. And the head of their army, Sisera, he tries to escape this way, and he finds some people who are not Israelites, and so he thinks they're going to be on his side. He says, "Can I rest here with you?" They go, "Sure, come on in." They got a tent, and there's the woman of the house there. Her name is Jael. That's my granddaughter's name. And Jael says, "Here, have some warm milk to drink." And she gives him warm milk. What does he do?
He's asleep.
Right. While he's sleeping, she puts a tent peg on his temple. I mean, it's a violent ending, but it's like the Lord gives the glory to a woman. She becomes the one who destroys the enemy command. And he defeats this undefeatable army in this tremendous miracle. So look at some of the pictures of this. It's really neat, I think. There's Mount Tabor, or Tabor in Hebrew. So what do you notice? It's not like part of a giant mountain range. It's not like a whole bunch of mountains. It's just kind of like one mountain just sitting up there all by itself. And you can almost imagine the 10,000 Israelite soldiers all getting up on that mountain, trying to protect themselves there, gathering around, waiting, just wondering what's going to happen. Why did I join this dumb army? I'm trapped here. This is a picture looking down from Mount Tabor into the Jezreel Valley. So you see how hard it would be for somebody to come up at you there? And what do you notice about the valley, by the way? Up where you are, what's down in the foreground? Rocks. But what's down in the valley?
Water.
Crops, fields, water. It's very fertile down there. Very nice. This is looking in the Jezreel Valley now eastward. So you're looking at Mount Tabor from another angle. So you see how it's all just kind of sits out there all by itself. But what do you notice again in the foreground? All farm fields. Yeah, this is where the ground is so fertile there, and they do get plenty of rain, and it's just some of the most marvelous farmland in the world. This is on Mount Carmel. Remember where I showed that to you? Which was even further to the west. And now you're looking again across the Jezreel Valley from another angle. And this is, again, from Mount Carmel, looking in the valley at yet another angle. I think this is Mount Gilboa at the right. So that means Tabor could be that one way over there. I'm not sure. But you know what else is kind of neat about this picture? Do you see these lines here in the middle of the valley? This is the Israeli Air Force Base now. They put their Air Force in there because it's a nice flat area where they can build runways. And this is, I remember I showed you the little town of Megiddo. So Megiddo is on the edge of that Carmel mountain range. So it's not way up high. It's only about 160 feet high. So that's defensible. That's a good place to build a city. But you notice that you're not looking as high up or as far down as you were in some of the previous pictures. Okay. So let's go on to another story in the book of Judges. Maybe the most famous of all the judges. Who would you say is the most famous of all? How about
Aaron?
Samson?
Oh,
How about Samson? Yeah, I think that's the one most people know. So now with Samson, you're going to an entirely different place. So here's the map of Israel, right? You see the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, the Mediterranean Sea. Here's Megiddo, here's Tabor, here's Jezreel, here's Mount Carmel. These are the places we've been looking at right up here, Gilboa. Now we're going way down south, and Samson and his adventures are going to take place down in this area. And so down here was a country called Philistia. The Philistines were not natural inhabitants of this area. The Philistines were a group of people that had come, we think, probably from Crete. So the Cretan civilization, which was quite advanced, had sent out settlers and colonists in different places, and one of the places they colonized was down here, which became known as Philistia. And so these were not natural inhabitants to this area. And Philistia was not that huge, maybe kind of covered this much, something like that. It's not that big. There were 5 main cities. Oh, they're on this map. That's good. There were 5 main cities for Philistia. Gath, Ekron, Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza. That last name Gaza, where have you heard that before?
Conflict, Gaza Strip.
Yeah, the Gaza Strip. This is the Gaza Strip right now. So ancient Philistia, that's now the Gaza Strip. So the Israelites, way back in their beginning, had trouble with the people living there. Today they still have trouble with the people living there. They're in constant conflict with each other. But you can see then those 5 cities, Philistia is not that big compared to all of Israel. But what do you have to notice? See, this helps make the Bible make sense and come alive. Where are the Israelites living down in the south? They're over here. What do you notice on this map? What color is that?
It's mountains.
Yeah, this is mountain or high hills. This is drier. What's over here? Green. And it's on the sea. So since they were seagoing people, they had constant trade routes with other people throughout the Mediterranean. So the Philistines have a constant flow of economic goods coming in. And the Israelites are hoping that they can get a few bushels of barley that year and maybe 1 or 2 new lambs so they can eke out a living. So the Israelites are over here, they're struggling. They've done archaeology on these important sites in Philistia, and they discovered something that, besides the fact that it reveals what was probably a booming economy, they also did something different. They were on like a silver coinage basis. So there's lots of silver coinage being used as the monetary
Currency?
Currency of the
currency,
time.
yes. Whereas here, what do you do if you live here? I'll trade you my land for 45 bushels of wheat, right? If you live here, I'll give you 13 pieces of silver for this. So it just says something about the economic prosperity that the Philistines had. So the Philistines were a very small area, but you could see why they were a constant pressure on the Israelites into the days of Saul and David, why the Israelites were constantly struggling. So God raises up, and during the time of the judges, this judge named Samson. Let's see, Samson was born here in Beit Shemesh. And then these are some of his adventures and the things that he did while he was going to these places. Without going into all the details, you remember a lot of the stories of Samson, right? And how he killed so many of the Philistines. At one point, he went to Gaza and he tore out the city gates and he carried the city gates 40 miles. Remember, he had superhuman strength all the way to the town of Hebron. And look where he's crossing a plain, but when he gets here, what's happening? It's getting hillier and hillier. He's going up and down rocks to get to Hebron. Can you imagine that feat? This is a picture of Hebron today, the older part of the city. This is the downtown area of Hebron. But Hebron today is populated mostly by Palestinians. And the Jews and the Palestinians kind of split areas where they're in charge, so there's lots of tension here. There's always things going on in Hebron where there's a tremendous amount of tension. There's archaeological digs of Beit Shemesh, so that's where Samson was born. So you can sort of see when you start getting into the hill country here, what the ground is like, right? See, it's not like huge mountains, but pretty hilly. That would not be easy to walk 5 or 10 miles through that stuff, right? It's a lot of up and down in there. Not an easy life. Here's a dig of a sample of the kind of house that was very typical in those days. So you notice that the house has one big rectangular room in the front, and then there were 3 smaller rectangular rooms perpendicular from that room. So they call this the 4-room house. And then very likely this main room in the front would have been built up where you could also go on the roof, and that's where they would sleep a lot of times at night because it's cooler out there at night. But one amazing thing happened during the period of the Judges. So I told you before about the development of the Iron Age. Something else that happened during that time frame of the Judges. It was the invention of the cistern. Did anyone have a cistern at your house growing up?
No.
So they realized that they could hollow out these areas underground and plaster them so that they would be waterproof, and then channel the rocks around so that when you would get rain. See what happens down here where you get less rainfall, you're getting almost all the rain in 3 months of the year. It all comes at once. And then the rest of the year, practically nothing. So, if you lived in any of these places here, where did you have to live? You had to live either by a river, which there's not much, or you had to live somewhere where there were springs, or someplace where there was fresh water, like Jericho. Which meant that vast areas of land here, you couldn't live there until the invention of the cistern. And now you could channel it so that when that 3 months of heavy rainfall would come, the water would wash down these little gullies you had built into this big cistern, and you could store water there that you could use then for the dry 9 months. Now what would that water be like sitting in that thing after 9 months? It would be awful. But it was something. You could drink it. So it was during that time frame, during the time of the judges, that all of a sudden little villages started sprouting up all over the place, and the population started to really explode because something dramatic had changed in the way that people were able to live their lives. I find this fascinating. I don't know if you do, how people lived back then and how they were able to survive. One last picture. This is modern day Ashkelon. I showed you the 5 Philistine cities. This was the city that was on the sea. So you can tell right away, if you're on the sea, the Mediterranean Sea is so beautiful, so tranquil, and you've got ships constantly coming in, bringing you goods. So the Philistines had it made, and the poor Israelites were way back there in those rocks, trying to make barley grow. So it gives you a sense of what was happening. After the time of the judges, you recall, God raised up Saul to be the king, and after Saul was David. And what characterized the monarchies of Saul and David? Constant warfare against the Philistines, until David really kind of finally crushed the Philistines. But you get a sense of how hard that was. That was harder than the Ukrainians beating the Russians, right? I mean, all the odds were against them. So you really see how the Lord was for them. Well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you find this at least a little bit as interesting as I do. Just looking at these places and seeing them and picturing the stories of the Bible happening there. And we'll pick up next week, and what I'd like to show you more of now would be David was the one that conquered Jerusalem and made it the capital, so I'd like to show you photos of Jerusalem, maybe a little more of the northern kingdom, but then also stuff from Galilee, where Jesus did most of his ministry, was right up here. And there's some great shots of some of that stuff that I should be able to dig up for you. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's good to be with you.